In October 1847, a Wesleyan Methodist minister who loved God and hated slavery crossed the Mason-Dixon line to pastor 40 Southern Christians who had taken the same courageous stands in the turbulent days before the Civil War. The result was Freedom's Hill, the first Wesleyan Methodist meeting house in the South. It was originally situated in a small town called Snow Camp in Alamance County, North Carolina. Wesleyans went there because there were a lot of Quakers in the area, and Quakers were anti-slavery as well. Wesleyans needed all the friends they could get. The chapel that they built was a simple one, but it was very sturdy. 27 feet by 36, was built on a foundation of field stones. No mortar, few nails. They fastened wood together with pegs, not only in the logs that built the church, but in the pews themselves. They were all handmade. And they worked through the winter months of 1847-48 and dedicated the church in March of 1848. Wesleyans were abolitionists. That meant they called for an immediate end to slavery. Above the Mason-Dixon line, that made them radicals. Below the Mason-Dixon line, it made them targets. The church was fired on to frighten away the worshipers, but they kept coming, entering through a door marked by bullet holes. Pastor, a young man 23 years of age named Adam Crooks, was poisoned but survived. Ambushes were laid for him, but they failed. He was arrested for preaching against slavery, and when he was, he asked his jailer, "If Jesus were here, would you arrest him too?" And the jailer's reply was, "If he was an abolitionist, we probably would." One layman in the church, a white man, Micajah McPherson, was lynched for his anti-slavery views. Miraculously, he also survived. Meanwhile, despite all the opposition and all the persecution, Freedom's Hill continued to be active on the Underground Railroad. A hollow tree near the church provided a hiding place for an escaped slave until nightfall made it possible to connect with the next safe house on his road north. Freedom's Hill was on the southern end of that pipeline we call the Underground Railroad. It's the most dangerous end, but many other Wesleyan churches in Indiana and Ohio and New York were also stations on the Underground Railroad. Freedom's Hill weathered its opposition, and the congregation continued to worship there for almost a century. When a new and a more comfortable sanctuary was built nearby, the old church was abandoned. But by the providence of God, it was not destroyed. It was later moved to the campus of Southern Wesleyan University, where it was painstakingly restored and rededicated in 2001. Here it stands as a reminder of the moral courage of those who went before us, and a challenge to follow in their footsteps.
A 175 years of Wesleyans in Indiana is a long time. But actually, the message of the Wesleys, forgiveness from the penalty of sin and deliverance from the power of sin, arrived in our state even earlier. In the early 1800s, Methodist circuit riders were already spreading the gospel and planting churches across the state. Several of those early Methodist congregations joined in a movement to abolish slavery from our country. Churches in Fountain City, Back Creek, and Layado became stops on an underground railroad, channeling runaway slaves to freedom in Canada. In 1843, when ministers in Michigan and New York decided to break away from the Methodist Church over the issue of slavery, it was no surprise that congregations in Indiana wanted to join this new denomination. By the Second General Conference of 1848, there were sufficient churches in the new Wesleyan Methodist connection that a separate Indiana conference was created.